for those of you that don't recognise the bald chap, that's me, not either of these other two. I'm Jamie Anderson, Gerry's son, Gerry's youngest son. I just flagged this up right at the start. In case any of you are feeling a bit dry on questions, I've got a prize for the best question. The prize is a first day cover of the Genius of Gerry Anderson stamps, signed by Dad, one of the last things he ever signed. So make sure you have a good question, please. No brown nosing allowed. So if anyone says, "Why are you so handsome, Jamie?" you're not getting it. And equally, if you're rude, you're not getting it either. So we've got a great collection of people on the panel, so I will just pass the mic along. They can introduce themselves. But thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it.
Hi there, my name's Mark Woollard.
I'm Judy Preece. I was one of the puppeteers on Terrorhawks, and delighted to be here because Gerry is the person who gave me a chance, gave my first job in film and television.
Hi, I'm Richard Gregory. I'm Phil Ford.
Okay. Someone like to kick us off with the first question? Just stick a hand up and I'll point you out. Oh, there we go.
How long did it take from the development and the drawings to the first models to be created for any of the programs, especially Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlett?
Gosh, so how long did it take? I think probably the best person is Richard, possibly, to ask that one. Sorry, Richard, to put you on the spot.
I would say probably you're talking about 6 to 8 weeks. There would be probably a week or so of ideas, and then maybe another week to draw that up, and basically you would probably take another, as I said, 6 weeks maybe to complete a model right up to a stage where you could actually shoot on it, because obviously it involves a pattern and molds, and really initially when you've finished it sometimes they're photographed but they actually are then altered because they don't quite look right when they're in 3D. But yeah, you're looking at about 8 weeks probably.
I should probably just get the guys to, well, other than Judy's done her introduction so eloquently, to let you know which shows they worked on, because then you may know how to direct your questions a bit better. So, Mark, can you give us an introduction as to what you've worked on with Dad?
Yes, I first started working for Gerry on Terrorhawks in '84, and then we went on and did Space Police, Dick Spanner, and I used to work closely with Gerry on the commercial period of his direction, which was back in the early 90s, I think it was. My memory's getting a bit vague. But, and then I worked with him on Space Precinct, and I was directing for him on New Captain Scarlett in 2005. And was involved with him right up till the end when he was developing his latest projects and scripts.
I think I've probably said my bit about Terrorhawks, but I also worked with Gerry on a Saturday morning programme called What's Up Doc, and I was in a lovely position of being able to employ him for a change, so that was quite fun. He was live on Saturday morning television.
I first worked with Gerry on Terrorhawks when he was initially getting the programme together, and I became the puppet maker on Terrorhawks. Our friendship, they went on for many years after that. We worked on many projects and TV advertisements together, and we worked on things such as Space Precinct, and Gerry became a very, very good friend, and our association continued really up until the past, the near past, so it was a great thing to do.
I worked with Gerry on the CGI Captain Scarlett, new Captain Scarlett. I'm a writer. I wrote, I think, the lion's share of the episodes on that, really because I was just available, I think. And Gerry, but obviously my relationship with Gerry stretched back to when I was a kid, really, because I was brought up on Gerry's shows, and I remember everything. I suppose my earliest memory of television actually is the first day when ITV started transmitting colour, and the first show that they transmitted was Attack of the Alligators from Thunderbirds, and I remember getting up early to go and watch it. So I've always counted myself as really lucky because I got to play in that sandbox as an adult when we actually started making Captain Scarlett again, which is one of those things you don't expect to do. So yeah, that's me.
Right, back to you guys. Question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, we hear a lot about how Gerry was so creative and how he put together team after team of wonderfully skilled people who were highly motivated to produce great programmes. But I'd like to know a bit more about, let's get a bit more rounded picture of him. What were the things he wasn't good at? What were his character flaws? What was the darker side?
Oh my God, I could get in a lot of trouble here. Yeah, navigation actually. He was famous for not being able to find his way anywhere, and even when he got his sat nav, he couldn't find his way around. I think probably from his early childhood, he had a few unpleasant experiences when he was growing up, and those made him a little bit more guarded. So as he went through his career, from my point of view, and this is from sort of looking back in hindsight and laying down my experience of him as a father and as a person, that those experiences hardened him a little bit, and he was very much of the once bitten, twice as shy way of thinking, although probably with him it was once bitten, second time you can piss off, as far as he was concerned. So yeah, I think the sort of the hardened emotional side maybe made things a little bit more difficult for him on occasion. I don't know if any of you guys have got any particular views on, not flaws, but less desirable characteristics.
I mean, Gerry was a very driven man. When he had one of his ideas, he was singular about trying to get it going. And if you were for him, obviously you were helping sweep him along, then you would be part of retaining the creative team. But although he would kind of accept criticism, there usually from his creative team, if you found criticism outside the creative team, like with other people, financiers, whatever, who had reasons why they didn't agree with him, then that disagreement would usually end up with Gerry cutting his losses with them and becoming, put him to one side and burning his bridge. But effectively, he could do that quite a lot, and that was both time-saving because he didn't waste time with people that he didn't want to get on with. But it also meant that he couldn't go back to the same place twice. So very often, if he'd got a production going, he would go on record by saying something about the person, or not necessarily on record in the media, but on record within the team, and we couldn't go past that particular person again. I think most people probably know with new Captain Scarlett, we were very disappointed in Granada and ITV how it was transmitted, and when Gerry phoned me up the morning that it was transmitted and was spitting feathers, and I'm sure he phoned Phil and some of the other directors as well, but he was so maligned by the whole process that he literally went to the media and he shouted as loud as he could about how bad he thought it had been treated. And of course, that burnt a whole series of bridges with ITV, which kind of bit him in the bottom with other things, but nonetheless he wanted to make sure that everybody was very clear about how he felt about things. I mean, probably not many of you know, maybe you've heard about the fact that he was approached on the Thunderbirds movie and offered a lot of money by Working Title to say nice things about the show. And I remember going to his office and he pushed a drawing across the desk to me, which was of the Fab 1. And he said, they've offered me this serious amount of money to say nice things about this show, and how can I say nice things about that? I rejected it. And he was absolutely adamant he wasn't going to say anything nice about it. And he was true to his word. I mean, he was also producing Scarlett at the same time, so he didn't want to have his sense of what was right and wrong brought into disrepute by saying something nice about something that was clearly not what he liked. So he was very clear. He did burn bridges, but ultimately it was all for the passion of the project he was on. So I think he was very, he could be prickly, but then again, everybody knew that about Gerry. But he was also a wonderfully nice guy, very generous, and as Judy says, he gave so many people in the business their first break, me included, from way back when. So he was, he had a dark side, but it was far away by his lighter, whiter side.
Well, I don't really have anything very negative to say about Gerry, except for he was a perfectionist, and if something wasn't quite how he wanted it to be, he was very direct and honest. And I remember when I first started on Terrorhawks, I was a bit nervous, obviously, because it was new, and we did the first rushes, and he came out looking very disgruntled, and he looked at us all, and I'm sorry about this, Richard, but actually he said, oh my God, he said, that hero looks like a blithering idiot. We've got to do something about this. And we were like, oh no. And so actually, I think we had to make a new face, didn't we? We had to make a new face for the puppet. But he was right. And he was very direct and he was very honest. And I guess that's the way you want to be if you want to make quality TV programmes. So there you go.
Yeah, the point that Judy just raised was exactly what I was talking about earlier, about the fact that you may go through several weeks of actually creating a character or a vehicle, and then it goes on camera and it fails. And I don't think that was the first time that had actually happened. And the great thing about Gerry was you could often have a complete bust-up of a creative argument with him, and eventually it would get sorted out, and usually he was right. And you could move on from there. But I think, as Jamie said, there were situations of trust with people, which I think were really important with him, and basically what he wanted, but he knew what he wanted, and I think those are great things about Gerry.
It's one of those funny things, isn't it, that Gerry was a man of vision, and he truly was, and he knew what he wanted, and he would do whatever he thought needed to be done to see his vision brought to the screen, which some people can read as being a negative in some ways, and Gerry did have his dark sides, and there were things that he wasn't so good at. And Jamie and I were talking earlier that Gerry had always said that he wasn't a businessman, he was a filmmaker, and not being a businessman to some extent could be viewed as a negative for him. He obviously, everybody knows about the wonderful relationship that he had with Lou Grade, where Lou Grade said that if Gerry wanted to make, it was one of Gerry's favourite. Gerry was full of stories, some you heard so many times, which was also a negative. But one of the stories about Lou Grade was, Gerry, if you want to make a film about that light bulb, I'd back you. And that was the relationship that he had, and those times back in the 60s were unusual times. Lou Grade was a very unusual man, and he was the perfect partner in many ways for Gerry. And I kind of think that when those days went, because Lou had treated him so well, I kind of think that was an environment that Gerry then found, to some extent, the way that Lou had treated him was, although that was a very big positive at the time, later on became a negative, because Gerry didn't perhaps have those connections because he hadn't needed them, because Lou had been such a great advocate of what he did, which then meant, by Gerry's own admission, that he wasn't the businessman. I kind of think maybe wasn't such a positive for him later on, which is a great shame, because the thing about Gerry, which is, I think, unique in terms of British television, in terms of the kinds of shows that he made and the ambition that those shows had. And unfortunately, perhaps there wasn't always the people in television who actually appreciated that ambition sometimes, which wasn't Gerry's fault. It was just the way that things became. So it wasn't his negative, it was just the negative that surrounded those kinds of shows then. In later years, which is a great shame. But Gerry's dark sides were in no way comparable with the huge positives that there were with Gerry. And he was a very, very, very generous man. But he was also a man of vision. And I always kind of thought that story that Mark tells there about Fab One. For the Thunderbirds movie. I mean, I remember Gerry telling me about that when we were making Scarlett, and I just remember thinking, he told me how much money they were offering him to endorse it, and I was thinking, I'm not so sure that I'd have had those kind of principles. So, he was a great man.
Question for all of you, including yourself, Jamie. What is your favourite episode of any Anderson production that you either worked on or didn't, and why?
Oh, damn it, I'm still holding that. I was sat at this end, so I thought you'd come to me last. Gosh, that's really, really difficult. There are so many. The first... I'm just going to go with the first story that pops into my head, really. And this isn't necessarily saying it's two that pop into my head, and that's only because they're the first ones that pop into my head. And I'm not saying, there must be some reason. I mean, one is Time Lash from UFO, which was just so audacious, and the other one is, gosh, I can't remember the title of it, but again, it's a live action one. It's from Space 1999, and that's the black hole one where they aged. Black Sun, that was it. And I can only quote those because they're the first ones that come to mind, because there are just so many. That's a very unfair question, but a good question.
I think mine's got to be Trapped in the Sky, really. I grew up with Gerry's puppet shows, and along came Thunderbirds, and I thought it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. And I really think that first episode of Thunderbirds was just so exciting, and the action in it, I think that's really got to be the most memorable. I think the second probably would be Attack of the Alligators, because I think that's just basically fun all the way through. So yeah, I think those have got to be mine too.
I don't think I've got one actually, so I'm gonna change your question to my favourite puppet character when I was a kid, and it was definitely, I liked Stingray as a little girl, and weirdly, because it's so on PC, I like the Mermaid Marina, Never Spoke, which is really odd because I love talking anyway.
It is a toughie, and like Phil, I'm going to go for Space 1999, the first episode of that, Breakaway, which was, I think that was just a unique piece of television when it was first produced, that show, and it was at the front end of the series, and it had, again, such high ambition. It was obviously an attempt to make something with production values that were far in excess of anything that we'd seen at that time. Literally the most expensive show made in Europe at the time, I believe, as well, which is another one of Gerry's traits. He had a strong probability of making the most expensive show made in Europe at the time.
Was it in the world?
It might have been the world, actually, yeah. Or off the world. But that was an extremely influential show for me, partly because, the nearest thing to it in style was 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I think we all know, probably cribbed a bit of that to give it the look, but it was just a fusion of grown-up sci-fi storytelling, actors with credibility, and the effects, which were straight off the page, were looking beautifully crafted, and gave the whole show a feel of that still stands up today. In fact, I can watch that episode anytime you like, and I think it still looks as good as the first day it was transmitted. It still looks as amazing visually and as strong with the story, even though the story, as we all know, I think, was based on, you can't have a TV show, you can't have a sci-fi show made on Earth, Gerry, you have to set it off the world so he blows the moon out of orbit. So Gerry's solution to a problem. But it was fundamentally the acme of television at the time, I think. But I do have to add a caveat that Thunderbirds influenced me just as much as Phil. We were the same age. And I think, for me, Trapped in the Sky, which was... Did Gerry write that himself? I can't remember. Was it Ron Fireflash? It was the first one, isn't it? I think he had a hand in writing that one, and I think that is just whenever I think of Thunderbirds, that's the one that springs to mind, with those little carrier craft trying to land the Fireflash on its back, which is just an audacious concept, and yet it works so well within the show itself and the context of the show, and the evil Baldy and everything that was set up in the first show that kind of transmitted through the rest of the episodes. It was just an amazing piece of iconographic, that'll do, television, and I think both those shows are very laudable.
I hate it when people ask me this question, so thanks a lot for that. I have a few, actually, so I'm going to be difficult and not give you one, but Trapped in the Sky I loved, but when I watched it as a kid, I actually found the sequence of the elevator cars too terrifying and too tense to watch. So I would often get halfway through, pause the video, and go outside and walk around. This is a slightly odd 6-year-old when I was watching the video. Attack of the Alligators was my true favourite Thunderbirds episode, partly because of the stories Dad would tell about it, which I'm sure you've all heard a million times before, but just the fact that there were these well, I didn't realise they were baby alligators or small alligators. I just was totally convinced that these real things were attacking the puppets, and it was just brilliant. If we move a bit later on, I'm afraid the new Captain Scarlett. I did really enjoy, and it was so sad to see how it was treated and the reception it got. But Grey Skulls is one of my particular favourites. I don't know if did you write that, Phil? Oh, how convenient! Phil wrote that one. But it's just for me the point where the series reached its absolute peak in technical terms. The story was great. It was thoroughly enjoyable, and yeah, it's always going to be a favourite. Yeah. Other than that, I just remember sitting at home as a kid and watching endless Terrorhawks episodes too. So you all win across the board there. Thanks, guys. Another question, please, folks. Oh, now there was a chap, someone back there that had their hand up before. Yeah, I think it's you that's waving.
When you showed us the stamps, when Gerry, the day they were announced, Gerry was talking about a new Thunderbird series. Is that the one that's now coming now, or has that dropped off and a new one come up?
Oh, a difficult question. I can't really comment on it. That's not because I'm being awkward, but it's, the series that's being dealt with now is not connected to any of his original work that he did, I'm afraid to say. But beyond that, I can't really tell you much about it. So, yeah, I hope that sort of answers your question. Mark down the front here.
Out of all Gerry's shows, what's your opinion on Barry Gray's music? And do you have any favourite pieces?
Well, funnily enough, we were talking about the Secret Service earlier on, which some people here can't stand, but I actually was quite fond of. Barry's music was just amazing. And he was one of those really incredibly talented people that Dad managed to come across and see the passion and talent that he had. The theme to the Secret Service is actually one of my favourites. We were discussing earlier again that it's slightly academic because that title sequence is a fugue, which is a ridiculously academic thing to do as a musician. It's the kind of thing as a composer you do just to show off. So Barry really was just showing off, but I just love the theme. So yeah, that's absolutely my favourite.
Funnily enough, my favourite piece of Barry Gray music is probably less music and more tonality. It's the closing sequence on UFO, the end title sequence? And you have that theremin weave that he does, which is not very melodic, but it's so atmospheric. And again, being at the cutting edge on a cutting edge show, I can't remember another example of a TV show signing off with a theremin and a wavy kind of waveform, but it was kind of it showed just how free thinking Barry Gray was, because we all know he could turn a good tune when he wanted to, but that was what has come to be known as out of the box thinking, I think, because it was just such a great example of leaving everything else behind you'd done before and then entering into a new space and trying something different. And I think it's so evocative of the planetary alignment, whatever's going on. It was a 2001 sort of feel to it. I think it was an outstanding piece of musicianship to do something like that and not have to resort or revert to what you've done before. And I think that's very laudable.
For me, it's got to be the Thunderbirds theme. I think the Thunderbirds. Yeah. I think the Thunderbirds theme has become such an iconic thing that the number of times it gets played on television and radio whenever anybody wants to make a point about something that's going to be exciting or important, that I think it's got to be the Thunderbirds theme, because it's just a phenomenal piece of music. So yeah, that's what I think.
I've got to agree, the Thunderbirds theme is just wow. It just stands out, and it's been used so many times by so many places. It's just it's one of those theme tunes that you can hear anywhere. I can remember being on holiday in Cornwall and there was the local brass band playing, and what do they strike up with? You just can't escape it. It's just phenomenal. It really is. It's an amazing piece of music. However. My favourite and the theme tune, which I was just stamping away with my feet here, is the theme to UFO, which I just think is the funkiest piece of music ever written for television. I just love it to bits, and it's the only criticism I have is it's so short. I want that to go on for a couple more minutes, and I have heard various versions of it. One from Japan, which goes on for about 2 or 3 minutes and whatever. I just love that music. It's fantastic, and equally, the opening sequence for UFO is one of my favourites. But then UFO is my favourite of Gerry's shows, to be honest. So yeah, there you go, UFO.
Well, I was just going to third the Thunderbirds theme tune, but I was just saying the only problem with it is that once you get it in your head, you can't get it out of your head, and it's going to be with me all the way back down to London later on this afternoon.
Our Dutch visitor has a question, I think.
I have 2 questions for Judy concerning terror hoax. One, I wanted to know, in terror hoax you see the monsters through a lot.
Oh yes, they do.
How did they manage to do that? Did they use them spit or did they?
No, we didn't spit into their mouth to make them drill. No. What we did... Now, the thing is, the puppets were quite unusual because the way they operated, you put 2 fingers in the bottom jaw like that to move the jaw up and down. And this was quite unusual, and I thought it was a bit weird, actually. Sorry, Richard, because all the other puppetry I'd done, you used your thumb to move the jaw up and down like that, but there wasn't space to do it. So what we do is, just before we went for a take, I get this very, very technical mixture of Swarfiga and KY jelly was the secret ingredient. Mix it all up, and then I'd sort of squish it into the mouth. So as the puppeteers moved the mouth up and down to lip sync to it, gradually it would all ooze out the sides and look disgusting. So that's the answer to that. Swarfiga and KY jelly, that's what we used.
My second question is, you see the zeroids moving so smoothly. I mean, if you move a ball or something, it goes just any side. So how did they move so smoothly?
Well, of course, as you're probably not supposed to know, we had more than one version of the Zeroid. So we had the Zeroid that was on the stand that had 101 connections to make it all work. And I know, because I was the person who had to make all these connections. And actually, after having connected all these things together for about 1.5 years, I said to the guy who made the Zeroid, couldn't you just put it onto one unit socket? One, and he said, oh yeah, universal plug type thing. I said, I could have done that. It seemed too easy. I was like, oh, thanks. So we had that version, and I used to have to make the lights of the Zeroids lip sync to the voices of the wonderful voice of Windsor Davis. But then when we wanted them to move, what we had to do is put the replica, very advanced technology replica, in position, and we get an air hose, and the replica was basically a football painted. That's all it was. It was basic, wasn't it? But we had to very gently just blow it with air. And I don't know whether we speeded the film up to make it look faster. We reversed the film, didn't we? That's right. We did everything backwards. So yeah, so it was in reverse. That's right. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that? No. Was that it?
Yeah.
I love it.
Did you hear that? They were glued down with blue tack, you didn't hear it. Very technical, Richard. I can see why Dad picked you out for so many shows. Back here.
This is aimed at all of you. It was rumoured that the creators of South Park, who then made Team America, approached Gerry Anderson to help make almost a rude version of Thunderbirds, or just have his help. Is that true, or is that just something that got rumoured up and...
Well, Mark seems to think it is true. I didn't, but there we go.
Well, Gerry was over in, I think it was Canada or somewhere, and he was doing a signing, and during the course of the signing, one of the people who came up and asked for his autograph was Trey Parker, and he introduced himself, and of course Gerry didn't know who he was, never having seen South Park, not his thing, but he said, we're doing me and my partner doing a film, and obviously it's based on using marionettes. Is there any advice you could give us? And Gerry's usual advice was, don't bother, don't use marionettes, it's the worst experience of my life using marionettes. So he tried to advise him not to use marionettes, and on his return he had another email from Trey Parker saying, I'm really interested in getting involved in this, and Gerry wasn't particularly interested in being involved with marionettes again, and so he kept it at arm's length. But I remember when they produced the trailer for Team America, and Gerry had a version of it. He was sent to him. He viewed it, and he obviously they did a wonderful job of making everything look amazing. and part of its charm was some bits didn't look as amazing as others, and they were cribbing for, the problems with making the show. And Gerry was asked his opinion on it. He said, "Oh, I love it. It looks great. I really love the idea of the show, and fundamentally they got it right." And then, of course, he went and saw the film and retracted everything he said, because it wasn't really Gerry's type of humour, with projectile vomiting and marionette sex. Although he was a very funny man and very open, but he wasn't. I just thought marionettes doing it was goodness. But yeah, he did have those conversations, and there was, he was contacted by them. And so he was contacted by Kubrick for 2001 as well. I mean, he was always kind of wanted to keep his kind of influence on his stuff. He wasn't keen to work for other people as well, which is another part of the reason why he would have an answer like that, because he was always concentrating on his own kind of shows. But yes, he did have the conversations.
Peter Cook and Dudley Moore did a spoof called Super Thunder Steam Car. Did Gerry ever see it? It's on YouTube if you haven't, and it's worth it. But did Gerry ever see it, and if so, what was his reaction?
He did see it, yes. I think he found all these things a mixture of being a pleasant nod and being terribly insulting, because he obviously worked so hard to get these bloody puppets, what did he call them, little bastards, I think, to actually move in an effective way and to try and look convincing. And all these lovely people would take the piss out of him terribly. But I don't know if you guys ever spoke with him directly about it. But, there you go, Rich.
It was very interesting talking to Gerry about this subject, because he felt very insulted sometimes, but I always used to say to him, at least you've got the best possible people taking the mickey out of you, Gerry. And I don't know if he ever appreciated that, but certainly with the Trey Parker story, which he told me, I said, you've really got high profile people here who they're paying homage, they actually love the stuff, which is why they're taking the mickey out of it, Gerry. So you've got the best people in the world, the most high profile comedians really think you're a great guy.
What was Gerry's most what was Gerry's soft? Did Gerry have a soft spot for a character?
Yeah,
Marina. Oh, well, two, I think, from what he said to me. Parker was always his absolute favourite, partly because of the voice story, which again I'm sure you've all heard, the wine waiter in the pub, who had that ridiculous way of speaking, but also Marina, because she was beautiful and couldn't speak, which not the nicest thing to say, but and had a soft spot for Kate Kestrel apparently. Oh, go on.
Well, I think he quite liked the fact that her hair kept changing colour. Do you remember all those different? She had different colour wigs to match the outfits. Yeah.
I think also because Kate Kestrel was played by a real person, because there was a single release, wasn't there?
Oh yes, yes.
And the young lady who played the part of Kate Kestrel in that was quite good looking, and I think Gerry liked her. But yeah, I mean, the Parker thing was because Gerry had his office and he had a few mementos in it, but Parker was always until he got rid of him, sold him later on, but it was always the trophy that was in the corner, always watching over your shoulder and judging you.
Yeah, on the Parker, I did see him just now, he may have disappeared. There's a very nice chap called Duncan Willis who's in Anderson Alley, and he has all the puppet replicas. He made Dad a Parker just off his own back, decided to do it towards the end of last year, and Parker sat and watched over Dad in his final weeks, which I know he would have been so grateful for if you'd been able to tell Duncan that. So thank you, Duncan, if you're still here. If not, I'll tell him later.
I know you talked about marionettes being quite difficult to work with. Were there any other either puppets or props or models that were really particularly tough to make or work with?
I think all of them were. I remember Gerry was commissioned to do a sequence for a stage play called Return to the Forbidden Planet. And I remember he called me in, myself and Mark Harris, who was an art director. And Gerry wasn't aware of the provenance of this particular show. And it's based on a science fiction film called Forbidden Planet, which was loosely based on Tempest, or yeah. And Gerry was very insular about what he watched. He was very selective about his influences, so he didn't feel that he was ever going to be influenced by other people's work. And so he'd gone out of his way to miss some really monumental piece of cinema history, one of them being Forbidden Planet. And within that story there's a monster called the Monster of the Id, which is basically hand-drawn cell animation. But it was a great story, and this thing was like the worst possible evil you could possibly imagine, made manifest. We had to recreate something within this show. So Gerry, being unaware of what the show was, except to know it was mooted as Shakespeare's lost rock and roll sci-fi kind of number, we brought Gerry this copy of Forbidden Planet, which was made in 1956, and we put it into his video player, because that's what it was then. And we switched it on, and we sat back and watched the opening titles. And Gerry turned to Mark and myself and he said, "It's in colour." He was unaware that the thing was even that, this is an MGM film, it was very lavish. And then you could see him kind of start shrinking, thinking, Christ, I've signed up to do this, and there's all these fantastic effects in it, and he wasn't quite sure how to handle it. But we subsequently had meetings with the producers of the show, and it was very clear they wanted something that was comedic. So we had to recreate the Monster of the Id as a backdrop which was projected behind the actors attacking this so-called spaceship. And we used a boggling puppet, which was a common shop bought, like a big ball of snot with 10 things on it, which we then kind of put on top of a bucket and covered with expanding foam. It was very convincing, I have to tell you. And it had lots of tentacles and arms, and we had to shoot this for frumpence, as Gerry would say, and we had a camera in Bray Studios, and we were trying to get this thing to animate at the same time as doing an earthquake below it, and it was, no matter how many times we tried it, we just couldn't do it. And I think we shot for 2 days trying to get some sort of credible performance out of this thing, and it just looked laughable, which, funnily enough, was exactly what was required. Although we had this horrible time doing it, when it was projected in the sort of show, my wife and I went and saw it, it was actually one of the funniest things we've ever seen. But apart from that particular instance, I mean, practically everything had its own problems. When I was working on Terrorhawks, again, working with modelled miniatures with Steve Begg, I mean, the wires were always the problem. We had Harry Oakes there trying to get rid of the wires, but they were constantly, every time we changed lighting angle, camera angle, trying to get rid of the wires was the thing, was a perennial thing with Thunderbirds, with all the characters. So whenever you had that kind of fly-by-wire technology, it was always a pain, but hopefully you never saw it, but I'm sure you did.
I think the ironic thing about this is that, yes, puppets are sometimes difficult to work with, and yes, I think the weird thing is that this is my first job in film and television doing puppetry, and Gerry made no bones about the fact that actually he hated puppets, and he was always very honest about the fact he never wanted to work with puppets. But actually, I think that's one of the iconic things about Thunderbirds, the way they walked, the way they moved. And if I'm honest, when he tried to do those with human beings, you never quite got that essence of Thunderbirds. And when we worked on Terrorhawks, they were still, in a sense, you couldn't see the strings, but we were operating them from underneath, and the mechanism for moving the arms wasn't that simple. I get what I say. So you got a certain element of puppetiness about it, but actually, that was part of the charm. I think that was part of the charm. That's what captured me as a kid. And I think, to be honest, had he not have worked with all these really difficult puppets and everything else, he'd never have become so famous. I'm sorry to say. Sorry, Gerry, but, you needed those awkward puppets. Oh, look!
This actually is a puppet that Christine, Granville and myself actually made because there wasn't a real Scot in existence. And this is actually the puppet that made the Kit Kat ad. So this gives you an idea of, basically, this is a real Scot. It was made by some parts that Christine had in her garage. It would have been there since the 1960s when they closed the studio in Slough. So this gives you an idea of the size. But this would have been on the top 12-foot steel wires. So you can see basically how difficult, because the one thing Christine always said was that when you turn the control, it was about 2 seconds later that the actual puppet did anything. But they're very, very basic puppets. They're
They're very, very well made from the point of view of they are really sort of, you know, just a really good marionette. The body, for instance, when it's unstrung, will actually fall into a natural position every time you lay it down. But you can see that, for instance, Scott, look, he's virtually taking his own weight now. Yeah? And the movement of the feet. The walking was the one thing that really was extraordinary. But this one was rigged by Christine, and you can see.
A bit of a bounce in there. Yeah, got to get a bit, very good. Got to get a pendulum movement. I'll just play around and you can carry on talking.
Yeah. See, the thing about Captain Scarlett, the new Captain Scarlett, was that, as we all famously know, Gerry hated the puppets, and he hated them for very good reasons, because they couldn't run, they couldn't fight, and all those kinds of action things. Which is the reason, of course, we gave birth to those amazing vehicles that are just so well known for Gerry's stuff. And yeah, absolutely right. You know, maybe Gerry wouldn't have been so famous if it hadn't been for the puppets. The fact they did, but he made them work. But yeah, when we came to do Captain Scarlett, the real reason that Gerry wanted to do Captain Scarlett was because now the technology was that we had CGI, and the show, the characters could do all of those things they could never do in the originals. They could run, they could fight, they could walk, and it was the first time I'd done any kind of animation when I came to do Captain Scarlett, and to me it was fabulous because you kind of thought, wow, we can do anything, we can go anywhere. But the thing was that actually, you know, with CGI, you couldn't. You know, there was still always a cost imperative there, which was something that I had to become used to. And you could still only have so many characters, which is the same with puppets and with live action. So you couldn't just do anything you wanted to. And we did have some standard characters, if I recall, which kind of were remade for various different on the CGI shows, didn't we, Mark? I couldn't tell you who they were, or whatever, but yeah. So you did have. There's a whole new technical aspects to it, which Mark probably knows better than I do, in terms of actually building them, because you had a framework, a wide framework, and it's interesting because it was a whole new skill park, really, for people. You know, we had all these clever people who built puppets for puppet shows, and had actually, you know, the clever people, the puppeteers who've actually been able to work them. And then when you came to Scarlett, actually, it was really the same kind of thing, wasn't it? We used stop motion, not stop motion. What was it called? I can't remember what it's called. Sorry. Motion capture, that's it, motion capture, on a lot of Scarlett as it was developed. We built our own motion capture studio where people would be actors, would have these little ping pong balls attached to them, and the camera would film that, and that would be translated into the graphics, which would then ultimately be used, which was very clever. But one of the things that I thought was really funny about when we did the CGI Captain Scarlett, as opposed to when you did the puppet shows, was famously you would have the puppets do everything apart from a hand, and it was always a human hand that you would use there. And when we came to do Scarlett, as I recall, I might correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it seemed to me that you would have a lot of the action was all done with motion capture until it came to a hand, and then that was be done more traditionally. And so it's actually the other way around with that, which I thought was fascinating. But Mark knows far more about the kind of technical aspects of doing the CGI characters.
Well, yes, with the CGI motion capture technology, it wouldn't record any of the facial characteristics, and it wouldn't record the hand positions. So they'd have to be keyframes. So that means somebody had to go and animate them individually, frame by frame. But I mean, I've got a sweet spot for New Captain Scarlett for various reasons. But it was again systematic of Gerry's approach to filmmaking, which was to try to be the best, embrace new technology, and make it for an audience of today, but still keeping as much of the perennial things that makes his shows great, you know, within the structure of the shows. And so I remember him talking about Phil, which Phil probably won't know about this, but we had 3 writers primarily on the show, but we ended up with Phil writing the bulk of the stuff because Gerry knew that Phil got it, and writing a show like Captain Scarlett for 25 minutes, which is effectively how long the show was, and getting all of the action and the emotion and the brand new concepts and whatever had to be the story of the week in that 25 minutes was very difficult. And there were some good episodes written by some other writers as well, but you can see the ones that Phil has written because they stand as the better episodes. There's my favourite episode of the shows was
one that you directed?
The one I directed, which was called Touch of the Reaper, which was an ambitious episode. It was so ambitious, and it was one of the first ones that Phil wrote, and it was at the front end of the show, front end of the series. And we knew we needed to learn more about the CG and what we could do about it, and because we were learning by doing. So it was pushed back to the back end of the season so that we could amass all the assets we required to be able to embrace what was effectively a massive chase sequence, huge vehicles, all that sort of thing. But it was very much, for me, it was very much encapsulated the Captain Scarlett show because there was this high drama, there was an infected kind of Mistron twist to it. Mistron's infect a character that then infects somebody else that then gets close to the president, so it's kind of passing on, transmitting this disease, which is a very clever idea to get past all of the Mistron kind of detectors. It ripped along, and it had an awful lot of action, but the great thing about it was that Captain Scarlett gets buggered in the middle of it. He gets touched by this guy, and he has to, well, maybe my choice of words maybe wasn't quite good. He has to kind of he had to heal himself again. I can't remember the name of the thing. That's the one. So it had everything in it that you'd expect from the original Captain Scarlett, and it really worked well. But also another thing that you wrote, which is another one of my episodes, which I thought was very extraordinary, was the Chiller episode where Captain Scarlett, there's always this question about, okay, Captain Scarlett gets knocked back and has to retrometabolize, whatever, but what happens if he goes just a little bit too far and maybe he's the other side of where he would normally be? What happens to him? And there was this seminal episode where Captain Scarlett is in a kind of is a little bit in limbo, and we don't really understand what's happening. All we know is we can see what's happening to him from his perspective, and the story unfolds, and he kind of usurps a Mistron attempt to destroy Cloudbase. And I thought that was a very cleverly done piece of script writing, because it was right outside of what you'd normally expect from the Captain Scarlett canon that we'd all know and loved from the previous show. So it gave new legs to the kind of what Captain Scarlett was all about. And I think it is effectively a ghost. Or was he? But in principle, that kind of challenging the Captain Scarlett format, and also the method with which we got the motion capture and the keyframe technology, all the CGI stuff, the vehicles that we introduced, which we all knew was part and parcel of the charm of Gerry's shows. Why have a vehicle with 4 wheels when you can have one with 16? I mean, it stands to reason. So we had these amazing craft, and then situations could arise out of them, and it was a really, really good show. I thought, Captain Scarlett. I'm just very sad it didn't go as well as it did.
But one of the things, just going to have to go back to you again in a second. But one of the you were talking about Touch of the Reaper, and one of the things, because one of the other problems with CGI was that, of course, in terms of cost, you couldn't do loose fabrics and things, and hair and water were really difficult as well. And one of the things I remember about Touch of the Reaper, at least I think it's Touch of the Reaper anyway, is that when Scarlett gets onto Air Force One, it's by we shoot the car up into the air, and the top flies off, and Scarlett jumps onto the landing gear before it goes up. But if I remember correctly, we had Scarlett's hair blowing around in that, and that was really difficult to do. And I think that was one of the times when we were really pushing the envelope, weren't we? Or I say we, the animators were pushing the envelope there in what you could do with these characters. And then later on, I remember there was a story, the Akiles Messenger, where for ages and ages, David Lane, I think, directed that one. I seem to remember it called for some billowing curtains, and they worked for ages and ages trying to get these billowing curtains to work. And later on, there was an episode called Proteus, which was about a ship and we had Scarlett in water in that, which worked really well. And later on, in another episode, which was Best of Enemies, which I didn't write officially, which had water in there, and all the time we were kind of pushing, I say we again, it was the whole show, was pushing the envelope in terms of what you could do with CG to make these things. And I just remember Scarlett's hair blowing in that particular one.
Right, I'm acutely aware that we've only got 8 minutes to be finishing it out, so we'll do quick fire answers and try to do quick fire questions.
If Gerry, we've had the question about which was his favourite character, which was going to be my question, but my second question would be, if he was one of the characters in one of his shows, who would he be?
Well, I think that's a simple answer. There's already been one, which was the robot from XL5. So he was a character in one of his own shows.
There was an episode as well, which we were going to do on CGI Scarlett, called House of Dolls, which Gerry ultimately thought was too scary for us to do, which we didn't do. But it involved a toy maker, and we were actually going to cast Gerry as that toy maker, weren't we?
I was going to say, yes, he was in Dick Spanner as well, as a producer.
Given the original Mistrons only appeared in halos of light, what did the panel think they actually looked like?
I think that's a question that has no answer, isn't it? I mean, I would have, being disembodied and, you only saw the circles of light, I'd imagined, and I think somewhere I read that they were the machine intelligence, weren't they, the Mistrons? I know you were obviously plumbing the depths of the previous canon of Scarlett, but I seem to remember that there was an allusion to them being on Mars, a base left by the Mistrons, whatever they were, that was machine intelligence, but I have no idea what they would have looked like. 100-watt Osmonds, I'd imagine.
I always thought they looked like a torch with a little circle of black plastic in the middle.
They were disembodied, so they looked like nothing.
There's your answer. Right, next.
Were any of his characters inspired? Zelda always reminded me of my mum. Terrified me. Were they all just completely made up, or?
Well, I mean, for the most part, I understand a lot of the Thunderbirds characters were based on characters actors from real life, and certainly on Scarlett, we would have a fantasy casting session. All the directors would select from their from Spotlight, the casting call book, actors who might represent what we'd like to see in the shows, and then Gerry would have final kind of say on who they would be. But you may find that some of those characters are evocative of film stars because they're based on them, but tweaked so they don't look too similar.
Yeah. I was just double checking, but I always thought that Mary on Terrahawks was based on your mum, Jamie. Yeah. I always thought so, which is why I felt a bit guilty about the reference to Kate Kestrel earlier.
I always thought that perhaps because of some animosity that Dad split someone who shall not be named into a couple of characters on Terrahawks, but I don't want to be too specific because I don't want to upset anybody. Something like that. Let's try and put a couple more in. Yeah, back by the camera there. Yeah, go on.
It's sort of been touched upon in the answers of other questions, but a few of Gerry's things have been reincarnated several times now. And I know you can't really talk about the new Thunderbirds, and you didn't really approve of the movie. But is there a certain pressure for the production teams to keep to the original feel and essence of the work? And if so, how does that affect backing those projects?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch all that. To keep to the essence of Gerry's work, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, when we were making Scarlett, for example, there was we knew it had to be different, but we knew it had to do two things. It had to service the expectation of the people who were aware of the first Captain Scarlett and step up to the mark, but also be different, incredible, and realistic enough to service people who've never seen it before. So there's always an allusion to what's gone before, and Gerry always had his mind very firmly fixed on the original when he was working on or talking about working on other shows.
What do you think the state of science fiction would be now if Gerry had actually realised his dream of being a feature film producer and had never produced any of his shows?
If he'd realised it?
If he had realised it and never produced any of the shows that he did? Because he probably wouldn't have done it on the big
Oh,
screen.
yeah, well, I think he'd have brought the same sort of attention to detail and commitment to what he always did, whether it was a commercial or feature film. He had great ambition, and he had lots of ideas, and we can only, estimate what would happen. But I mean, we knew that when we did Doppelganger, it was again, that was a seminal piece of work, and it was amazing. But yeah, he would have busted it out of the park, and I'm sure he would have.
I personally think that British television would be an awful lot poorer if Gerry had actually gone and made feature films and he hadn't made what he did. I mean, his legacy, which will go on and on, is all of those people that he inspired within the industry and outside of the industry to go and join NASA, become robotic engineers, all kinds of things. But the number of people that worked on his shows and went on to do all kinds of things in movies and in TV, I don't think we'd have them if it hadn't been for Gerry.
I think really that working with Gerry, the great thing about Gerry was the concept, and I think over the years he was able to put forward so many concepts to people on the way that he worked, which was really a lot of the time the crew he wanted involved totally in the project. And I don't think on the larger scale science fiction that would ever be possible. And I think because he did so many children's shows, he vastly influenced numerous generations.
I absolutely think that the quality he brought to the television shows was, he filmed it in the same way as you make film, and actually I was under a very misguided idea of how you made television when I got offered other work within the television industry, because it was nothing like the quality that the way Gerry made television programmes. So actually I think the legacy is with us all, and that's why we're all here today in this room.
Right, I'm really sorry everyone, we've run out of time and someone's been making rude gestures at me at the back. There's just a couple of little things to wrap up. First of all, can we have a round of applause for the panel? Thank you very much. Thank you very much everyone for your questions. Hugely appreciate it. I'm so sorry we didn't get through more, but we've got a load of gossips here. So my favourite question was the dark thing, so Sarah, thank you very much. Well done.